Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Pop. I'm the founder of Vizlogue, a data visualization and data storytelling lab that offers workshops. Here with me today, I have Øystein Moen, who's the Chief Product Officer at Highsoft. Today we'll cover various topics related to data visualization, data storytelling, particularly trends in the industry and how those trends are being influenced by AI and machine learning. So with that being said, welcome. And I say we just jump right in.
All right. Nice talking to you.
All right, great. So my first question is, I know you are the Chief Product Officer at Highsoft. Um, what does your role entail? I'm curious, and I'm sure others might be curious as well.
Yeah, it's multifaceted. Sort of simply summarized at the kind of broadest level, it's my responsibility that we have the right products. And that ends up being a role where there's always too much I could focus on, too much to do. So I try to focus where I think I can add the most value to the organization at any given point, and that can be multiple different things. So on the strategic level, I'd be working with the product vision and strategy for our product portfolio, and that includes the Highcharts product family, but also other things. I'd typically be working with our leadership team on that and sort of the direction of our company when it comes to what product should we offer and how should we be positioned. And then there's the execution side of it. So how do we make that into action, so to speak? And that's more working with our product managers, it's working with our product teams, and it can be making sure that we have clear goals and goal setting processes. It can be hiring product managers or helping to organize the product teams, that's that sort of thing. And then these days in product, also people talk about product operations or product ops and how we can sort of help product managers and product people have the right tools and decision support essentially for making product decisions. So that's also somewhere I can spend time. I have to be up to date on trends. So spending time looking at market trends, spending time talking to customers, understanding the customers, evangelizing and being a spokesperson is another side of it. So trying to share what we're learning in Highsoft essentially. And that can be at conferences or meetups or things like this, I suppose. But it's really a question of where I can add the most value at every moment. So when I started, I put a lot of focus on organization, and I was focused on kind of transforming us from a project-based organization into more of a modern product thinking organization, more user-centric. And then from there, we went into goal setting processes, and now we're working more on product vision and the sort of strategic level. So it's constantly changing.
Yeah, that's the world we live in, right?
It is.
Everything is constantly changing. It sounds like a pretty complex role. It sounds like you have a lot of balls to juggle and kind of picking at the right time what's the most important one to focus on.
Well, but also fun because you don't get bored. So there's always something new. So I like it.
That's right. So maybe along the same lines, in my experience, I've noticed that people who get into data visualization tend to have very different backgrounds. I mean, I've seen people who have a scientific background or maybe a design background, even a communication background or more of a data science background. So what's your background and what's your story behind the story? How did you get into the field of data visualization?
Yeah, I come from a developer background actually. So software engineering, I started programming as a kid. Actually, I was 8, I think, or around that age. My dad was doing programming. My grandfather was doing programming. Uh, Not necessarily for work, but still inspiring to a kid. So I started early, mostly systems development at the time, and then I got into the world of web a little bit later. So I did some freelance work essentially in my teenage years as a developer, and then eventually went into full-time development. And then a little bit further along in 2013, I joined Highsoft as a product developer back then, working on the core products. It was a much smaller company, so we were 4 developers at the time, I think. And if I leaned back in my chair, I would knock into the developer behind me. We were all in the same room, and I didn't know anything about database at that point. So I essentially had to read up on the field and learn a little bit of the science behind it, the theory behind it, to understand what we were building for, essentially. But obviously coming from that perspective, it was more of a technical challenge than a database challenge, perhaps in the beginning. But I find it interesting because it's a scientific field, but it's also there's a creative aspect to it as well. So at Highsoft, we like to talk about how it's extremely important that you get to insights. And we talk about things like time to insight as a metric and that sort of thing. And that has to be one of the core focus areas, but it's also there's that emotional component to it. So you often want the consumer of the visualization to be left with some sort of emotional impression. And it doesn't have to be a big feeling. It doesn't have to be fear or joy. It could be just brand recognition, for example. But it's interesting because it leaves this kind of creative headroom. And I think for us as tool builders as well, that poses some interesting challenges because it means we need to enable that creativity to happen. And that broadens the scope a little bit of what we're trying to do. So from the get-go, for example, we've always had to make sure that Highcharts could be extended, that you could go really custom if you wanted to with the tools. So it's one of the things that makes it exciting. It's we don't stop at the science, essentially, which I like.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, whenever I'm asked about, data visualization and why I'm passionate about it, I think that's the main beauty of data visualization, the fact that it's the intersection of science, art, or the craft, and maybe the business aspect. So it's almost like a Venn diagram, and you have to have skills from different areas, which keeps
Exactly.
you engaged, right? And keeps you going.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you have to keep up to date on trends, and you have to know what's going on in order to bring that back to Highsoft. So then, from your standpoint, and from what you're learning, seeing on a regular basis, and also maybe from talking to clients, what are some of the main trends that you see emerging in the industry that you think businesses and professionals should be aware of?
Well, I think there are many, and certainly AI, which I know we'll probably talk more about. But if we set AI aside for a moment, I think one trend that's been going on for quite a while now is the move towards interactivity. So data visualization, it used to be a static thing. In the beginning, when I joined Highsoft, we were talking about how screenshots from Excel was a big competitor. Because data viz online was images. It wasn't applications, so to speak. But now it's different. It's so if you go online and you find any serious application that works on data visualization, it's almost always interactive and they're living and moving things, right? So you can click on them, you can drag, and you can mutate the applications in various ways. And that's for 2 reasons, because you want to enable data exploration, obviously, but you also want to tell a story. So we see things like scrolly telling with using kind of interactivity to guide people through data stores or and animations being used, which also you couldn't do in static images, multi-step visualizations and that sort of thing. But also for data analysis, because we see people expecting things like filtering or zooming, drilling down, sorting, and that ends up then enabling people to interrogate the data essentially and get a better view of it. And then as tools, I think we're kind of evolving also to make it easier to build interactive visualizations, and that also ends up then kind of propelling that trend a little bit forward. And if we take it even one step further than that, another kind of extension to that trend, I think, is how it's moving into the space of extended reality. So we've seen this for a while, perhaps with fairly specific use cases or in specific industries where augmented reality or virtual reality are kind of platforms for visualization interactions that didn't used to be the case. So I think that's really interesting how that can actually be extremely valuable, that sort of extra dimension of interactivity that you wouldn't have on a computer screen. So for things like city planning, for example, in VR, you may be able to spot things quicker than you could on a 3D rendering on a computer screen. And I think also in sort of industrial manufacturing and research and development, we see more of the augmented reality visualizations popping in. So it's interesting. Then there's it's been a very long running trend, I think, that we've seen sort of data viz go from showing historical data to showing real-time data, and now more and more also forecasting and predictive data. And that sort of also follows from technology. So these are kind of technology-driven trends, I think, both with the interactivity and the ways we interact with data viz, but also in the content of the data viz, how we see companies have more resources to do predictions, or they have more live data streams. And so we're not just talking historical data anymore. And that's interesting as well, I think. And especially when you combine that with the ways that we can interact with data, it starts to be a different view of the world, essentially. So I think that's a space to watch when it comes to forecasting and predictions. I also always like to bring up accessibility for people with disabilities. That is another trend that we see, because we've kind of always seen it from governments. We've seen it from big companies that have accessibility teams, but it's increasingly something that everybody is paying attention to. And I think that's a very good thing. It ends up being almost the new mobile first. We talked about how applications should be designed for mobile, because most of your users are going to be on mobile, and then you will build from there. And now it's more and more a question of, well, let's build it accessible first. And that's where we're starting from. That's table stakes. And for data viz, there aren't really great standards for that yet, but the tools are out there. I think the resources are out there to where people are actually starting to do something good. And then for us as a company, that's also one of our focus areas where we're trying to push for advances, and hopefully an area where we can do something good and make it a little easier to think accessibility first with data viz as well. So I think there's a lot going on. So I think it's a good time to stay curious, essentially, and try out the new things that are happening.
Great. Well, I know you kind of alluded to AI, but you didn't quite dive deep into that. So maybe now is the time to do so. And I know AI is top of mind for most of us, if not for all of us. And businesses are, trying to be proactive or reactive, but at least have some sort of reaction to it. Also, there's maybe assumption that generative AI would or should make our work easier. But then there's also a fear of the lack of accuracy sometimes as well. So how do you see AI playing into data visualization and data storytelling, and maybe what are some areas that we should be cautious about?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, I think, and I think it's going to change things in at least two sort of fundamental dimensions. One being how we create visualizations, but also how do we use them? How do we analyze them? So that's kind of the flip side to it, also in the slightly later step, perhaps. But for how it's created, I think there is generative AI for images. So that's one way to build visualizations, but that's then kind of a step backwards, right? Because they're not interactive. So more interestingly, I think it's looking at the large language models and how they are capable of coding, and these days capable of coding interactive visualizations using libraries such as Highcharts or otherwise. And if you look at the major LLM interfaces today, ChatGPT and others, they will do this for you. If you ask for a chart, it will generate one, and it's typically interactive because they've generated the code or the configuration in some way. And that's a very real use case, I think, where you're building a chart from a text prompt. We were quite early on experimenting with that, actually, with our AI assistant. You can find it on our web pages, which will help you build high charts graphs. And the thinking is that this is something that's always available, works in your native language, and you get an answer straight away. It's not like a support forum, it's more of a co-piloting kind of assistance. And because we're kind of narrowing it down to this very specific use case where you're going to just use this for building charts, specifically with high charts, we're also able to do things like retrieval augmented generation, where we can pull in relevant documentation and content and context for the model, which then improves the quality as well. And I think it's interesting to see if the quality can actually go up in this case as well, because you can end up with a data viz expert in a box, essentially. And perhaps it becomes even easier to build interactivity as well this way. So I think if we look back at programming languages and sort of the evolution of programming languages through the years, we often talk about them kind of as high-level programming languages and low-level programming languages in terms of abstraction. So on one end of the spectrum, you would have machine code, right, which would be about the lowest level available, where you would be working sort of directly with the computer hardware. And then as the field of computer science has evolved, we've created ways to work with computers that are more abstract, and we get programming languages like Python, for example, or JavaScript that are more abstracted away from the hardware. And the theory is that then allows you to move faster. You can solve problems and tell the computer what to do without really knowing how everything works. And now with LLMs, we're almost taking another step on that scale to something that's even higher level of abstraction than what we consider programming languages, because now you're using natural language. And that lowers the bar for people to build things. It lowers the bar for people to do programming. And there are some downsides to that, which I think you alluded to as well. But more people will definitely be able to build more things. So as a marketing manager, for example, you could visualize campaign metrics, and you could just do this through natural language instead of dragging and dropping in a BI tool or having a developer build you something. So I think we're going to end up in a place where there's faster turnaround, and you can go from having an idea or having a question to having that insight faster. And if we can do so with more quality, it would be even better. But it comes with challenges, and of course, more people building more things could mean the people who shouldn't be building things are building things. That was an argument, interestingly, also with the higher level programming languages back in the day. But specifically with data viz, we have to think about accuracy, and we have to think about trust, I think. So this is an area where we can't really be wrong. So if you're building something and you want people to interrogate the data, you're assuming that is actually the data. So you can't have small inaccuracies, and the problem, of course, with the way that these models work is that they're wrong once in a while, like humans are wrong once in a while, but they're wrong in different ways than humans. So we're not trained to pick up on those mistakes, at least not yet. So at least for now, I think most likely for building visualizations, generative AI will remain sort of a co-pilot. It will continue to function sort of as an assistant where it can do some of the heavy lifting, but you're going to want humans to stay in the loop. But that's just on the building side. So if we have the analysis side, that's extremely interesting as well, I think. And you even have the gray zone in between where you have perhaps somebody using a dashboard and they could use an LLM to customize their experience, for example. So they may express what kind of data they are interested in and have generative AI then help them either code or configure that dashboard without having to put in any effort and sort of do the preliminary analysis yourself. And that could also extend to concepts like personalization, where the model would learn what is your preferred way of having data visualized, or what types of data would you care about. And then you will have pros and cons with that as well, because it could lead to echo chamber type effects where you're always getting the same types of data. So again, things to be careful, but interesting, I think, as a concept. And once you have this dashboard, and once you have the visualizations, it's also a question of can you use these models to help you explore them in some way? And there's a lot of talk about things like augmented annotations, which I think are interesting. So often if you have a visualization, you're reliant on the person interpreting the visualization to also have some contextual information or some background knowledge. And with LLMs, you can kind of move a little bit away from that in some cases. So you can look at your sales numbers and see that there was a huge dip in 2020. And the LLM may be able to tell you that, well, there was a pandemic around that time, right? This could be linked to COVID-19. That's the sort of insight that would be extremely difficult to code sort of through traditional systems. So already today, that's an area where I think the LLMs can be interesting. And if you take that a step further, it can also be the sort of enterprise application of that is when your company has so much data, you don't have an overview of all of it. And in that case, the LLM may be able to tell you insights from other data sets that may explain the one that you're currently looking at. So that's sort of the enterprise contextual augmented annotations. That's interesting as well, I think. And we touched on accessibility. I think that's another case for using the LLMs for analysis, where either you may generate text summaries, or you may be enabling the user to ask questions if there's something they don't understand, or perhaps it's a blind user that can't see the chart, enabling people to then query the language, the data in natural language. I think that's a promising direction. We've done some testing with this actually quite recently, where we wanted to test out people's level of trust in this type of system. And it's a little bit scary because the level of trust seems to be quite high, and maybe not proportional to the accuracy of what the LLMs are able to deliver. So if you're simply piping your visualizations or your data through these large language models, they're not built for data analysis. And so again, we go back to the accuracy question, because you really can't be wrong in these cases. And it turns out, even if you have pretty serious disclaimers and warnings, people end up trusting what comes out of these. So we were testing that with blind people specifically for text descriptions. And some of the users would mention that they were skeptical, but they would never put in the effort to verify. And then you're again left with potential misinformation that you don't want. So it's a slightly scary space. You may be better off using other models for data analysis than LLMs, but still very interesting technology that I think can be used for many good things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You definitely mentioned more use cases than I could think of. And yeah, also the scary part about, even those that are skeptical, I think it requires maybe not a lot, but still some effort, right, to check for accuracy. And I mean, many of us probably are just juggling a ton of things and just don't have the time to take that extra step. So yeah, that's definitely a scary space. Maybe
Yeah.
switching gears a little bit. I know that you are located in Norway. The company overall is located in Norway, but you operate at a global level. So I assume you interact with
Right.
clients. from various countries. What are maybe some trends, some differences that you notice that are more culturally specific that influence the way data visualization is being used or perceived?
Yeah, so I mean, there's absolutely differences. And I think, first of all, there are differences in preferences.
Mm.
So you may see things like 3D charts where the 3D is just for decoration. So like a 3D pie chart or a bar chart where the bars are 3D, but it's still two-dimensional data.
Yeah.
That was popular in the West for a short period, but it's not really popular at the moment. We prefer sort of the flat design. But it still seems to be prevalent in India, for example, having this 3D decoration approach to the designs. And of course, India is a huge country, and there are all kinds of designs coming out of there. But it does seem to still be very much alive in that region. You'll see similar things perhaps in Japan, where there's less of a minimalist approach than we take in the West. So more information, but still very sort of structurally laid out and kind of with intent, but less kind of scared of chaos perhaps than what we are in these parts of the world. But it's not necessarily a right or wrong kind of thing. It's more of a people have different ways to tell stories, I think, around the world. And then you get into the places where you can sort of misstep, I think, is where there are differences in interpretations. So the obvious one is perhaps colors and how they are perceived. So um, in the West, red is bad, green is good. Red is stop and green is go, right? Or red is negative and green is growth. If you go to China, some other parts of Asia, red is a very positive color, and it's perceived more to do with fortune, good fortune, or luck. And so the color use may be quite different if you look at the signs from these different parts of the world. Another thing that we run into a lot is reading order. So you have languages that read right to left instead of left to right. And that also affects how your natural layout would be for a chart. And perhaps you would have the axis go the other way around, for example, or you may want your labels to be positioned elsewhere. If you have a plot line, you may want the label on a different side than you would in a left to right culture. So you get that sort of thing. You get maps. A world map looks different in Europe than in Asia, which makes sense. You wouldn't have a world map centered on Europe if you lived in Asia, probably. Um, and then you have symbols and icons. That's another classic area with a lot of you're sort of relying on people interpreting it and putting some sort of connotation along with it. Um, and you can misstep there as well. So the thumbs up gesture, for example, is kind of approval in the West. In some cultures, it can be quite rude, so you're going to want to avoid that. Um, yeah, so there just ends up being all these little things where you need to be aware of your audience, I guess. Date formats is another thing where dates and times, that's even within the West, we see very different format from the US to the and it's just key points that a designer needs to keep in mind. And for us as tool builders, it's more of a question of enabling all of these different ways to design visualizations. And if there's anything we can do to localize and sort of help the visualization itself adapt to where the user is located, that's something we try to do as well. And dates is a good example of that, where we try to do things automatically. But overall, for us, mostly all we can do is try to educate, I think. So we're trying to kind of expand into offering best practices and guidelines for building efficient and effective visualizations. So one example of that is this tool we have called Chart Chooser, which is meant to really guide people to the right type of chart, so chart type for the data. not anything yet for cultural decisions, but maybe that's the next step.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've seen chart results, but they're never with the cultural aspect integrated into it. Yeah, that's definitely a big component that is missing. And maybe a perfect segue to the next question, which is about unexplored opportunities or unexplored areas in data visualization that you think maybe are not trends yet, or maybe at one point in time they were about to become trends, but they kind of took a step back. So are there any areas that you think should take the front seat in terms of data visualization, data storytelling, development?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. So, sadly, I think we see a lot of people using the basic chart types always, which is, of course, for good reason as well. They are tried and tested. They work. People recognize them, so there is no the cognitive load is less, right? And if you encounter a line chart or a bar chart or a pie chart, you've seen it before, most likely. But there is potential in exploring other ways of communicating with data visualizations, and of course in Highcharts we try to promote that, and we try to have a pretty wide palette of ways to communicate. So it's in some ways a little bit sad to see customers always going for the always going for the basics, even though it's understandable. But yeah, so maybe that's a place to explore carefully, perhaps, so as not to just add complexity for complexity's sake. But there can be sort of an engagement value to be drawn from it, I think, if you go a little bit beyond the basics. And then close to my heart as well is the concept of audio charts, which scientifically the term is sonification, and it's communicating data using sound. So if you have a line chart, for example, you may visualize that with a line that goes across and then it goes up to signify a value going up. And with sound, you can communicate this with a sound that plays at a low tone and then it plays at a rising tone to communicate how the sound goes up, for example, is one way to do it. But just the way that we perceive sound and visuals, they're a little bit different. We have a lot of sensitivity to temporal changes and rhythmic changes, for example. It can be quite immediate and quite alerting when you hear sounds compared to visuals. So just in terms of perception theory, there are these kinds of attributes in how we perceive sound that makes it, I think, interesting as a communication channel. And so far it's a bit of a novelty. Some people are using it. Apple is using it in their stock charts, for example, mostly as an accessibility feature, which makes sense. And it's been researched on for decades. So there's some novelty to it that can also then promote engagement, I think. But there is some real value also in just the differences in how we perceive visual information and auditory information. There is the accessibility argument here as well. So if you design it to be redundant communication, so you have the same information communicated through sound and through visuals, you can use it for accessibility, where a blind user may not be able to see the chart, but they can hear it, for example. But it's overall very promising. I think it's an area where we've put a bit of effort in from the Highchart side. So we've collaborated with Georgia Institute of Technology. They have a sonification research lab. So we're trying to bring in kind of the academic perspective and all of the work that's been done from there. And it's there's a lot of creativity that can happen around this as well. So if anyone's interested, take a look at audio charts and Highcharts and play around with it and see what you can come up with. It's quite fun.
Yeah, that's definitely a fascinating and unexplored, like a subfield of data visualization sonification. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, and hopefully some of the listeners will go in and actually check it out. I think it's a very, very interesting area, and maybe connected to areas that are unexplored and also to trends. Many professionals have or try to have a growth mindset. And for those that work in data visualization or are interested in developing their data visualization skills, what do you think are maybe the main areas they should focus on? I mean, assuming everyone has, limited time and limited capacity, if they were to prioritize maybe the top 3 areas to work on in terms of development, what would those be?
Yeah, it's always difficult trying to prioritize for other people without knowing their specific needs and use cases. But I think just the fact that you can treat data as a field of study is a win in and of itself. I think it's very easy for people just to throw something out there without thinking too much about the design. So recognizing that it is a science and just knowing a few things about that, I think that makes a huge difference. And you can go into some of the science, with which chart types fit what data. We talk about the grammar of graphics, and this goes all the way back to Bertrand, and this is research from the 60s, but it's still very relevant. Gestalt principles and sort of pre-attentive visual attributes, and you can go into the science of things, but even just knowing which colors should I pick and what should I label in my chart and how do I write good labels, um, it makes a huge difference just starting there and perhaps not going too deep. Accessibility, I would add to the list. Inclusive design, just knowing how it sort of relates to database. And there are tons of good resources out there in terms of books and courses and workshops. So I think just recognizing that every element in the visualization matters and kind of contributes to the experience. And so if you're adding or removing something, it matters, and you shouldn't do that without thinking about it. That's already a good starting point, and that will probably spark some curiosity in people with a growth mindset and perhaps guide them in the right direction for them. I would say also, in addition to the science, also embracing the art of it, so the creativity aspect. I think that's really valuable as well. Having some fun with it.
Maybe a follow-up question to that. How do you think one could practice the creativity aspect of it?
I believe in learning by doing. So I would say simply the playful learning mindset is a good way to go with that. But people have different ways of learning and exploring. So I'm not sure I want to limit people to doing it my way, but that's certainly been the case for me. Just having hobby projects and trying to think outside the box and not just going for the best and first design that you think of. But there are good design methodologies that you can play with for database. So that would be something to Google as well if you wanted to sort of push yourself in terms of creative thinking. There are some frameworks for that. So yeah, worth looking into.
Great. And my last question is about the future. I think we kind of talked about the present, but looking towards the future, you kind of alluded to a few areas that Highsoft is active on, like machine learning and AI and accessibility, sonification. I guess overall, if you were to summarize how the near future of data visualization looks like and how Highsoft is working towards that future and towards contributing to that future, how would you paint that?
I think data literacy is only going to continue to grow in importance. So there's more and more data, and I think more and more information in the world that needs to be analyzed and processed and acted upon. So kind of being able to efficiently communicate what matters and promoting that analysis, I think that's getting increasingly important. And I think people increasingly also want to analyze and inspect information. And it's interesting how this AI-driven content with hallucinations it seems to be igniting a bit of a counter movement as well with consciousness around data accuracy and information accuracy. So my hope at least would be that the tools that we provide can help people get to those things, and so help companies essentially build efficient insight machines, so to speak, where the consumers feel that they can also trust the data and the learnings that they get from it. And one thing I'd like to emphasize as well is the why behind all of it, because it's what we're essentially trying to get to here is people empowering people to understand and act on the information. So I think if we can get to a place in the world, and this ties back to things like accessibility, ties back to why we do all the AI things that we do. If we can get to the place where everybody has access to the information that they need, they have the tools to communicate it, and they have the tools to analyze it, I think it's a better place to be.
I think those are some wonderful closing thoughts, and hopefully some food for thought for all those listening. Anything else that you would like to add? Anything that maybe I haven't covered or I haven't thought of?
I think this was a great conversation. I would just implore everybody to have fun with data visualization as well. And it's been a serious conversation, but I think there's a lot of fun to be had as well.
Mr. Wells, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that everyone learns and gets a few tips that they can apply right away. And I guess they should go check out the Highchart and Highsoft websites and see what you've been working on, right?
Please do, and please let us know if you think we should be working on something else, or if you have any feedback for us. We love talking to people about database.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.